All right, my apologies for not getting this posted sooner than I did, but I had to take a quick trip down to Georgia and get some things done, and then we made our way back here. So I had a handful of assignments I had to get in by Wednesday by midnight. So we've got all those done now. So now we can go ahead and get this updated and uploaded. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So I want to take us through the last bit of evidentiary evidence. Remember, we had various apologetic arguments that we can make. They were ontological. In fact, I've got a slide here. Let me bring it up. So we've been talking about the evidentiary method. That is looking at evidence that we can put our hands on, and these are observable facts. This is kind of my slant. This is, I like the historicity of scripture, of the things that happen in biblical history. I like the fact that we can see records from Babylon. We can see records from Egypt, from Greece, from Rome. So we've got extra biblical sources that we can look at and actually confirm what we see in the Bible. That's tangible to me, and it's something we can put our hands on. These other arguments that you see, the teleological, ontological, cosmological, the presuppositional, and the moral arguments, these are more philosophical, in my opinion. I'm not much of a philosopher. I will say that just because my slant happens to be evidentiary, there are other people who embrace these other arguments for the Bible and for God. So I would not dismiss those. I'm going to touch on them at a high level. And tonight we'll try and wrap up the evidentiary method, and we'll hit on the teleological. This should not take very long tonight. So let's hit the last of the evidentiary method, and it will actually give us a segue and transition us into the teleological argument. We actually on Sunday night we covered both of these. So first, remember, we've got two forms of revelation that are offered. We got general revelation, and this is what the Apostle Paul says, that the world is without excuse. And what he means is, if a guy in the Amazon jungle is walking around, he ought to be able to look at nature and be able to tell that God exists. He says his invisible attributes are, namely his external power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, and that things have been made, so they are without excuse. That is basically the general revelation. That's available to anybody, whether you have scripture or not. The other revelation we have is called special revelation. That's what the prophets wrote. God revealed his word through the prophets that wrote his word down in the Old and New Testament. It was canonized and passed down through the generations to us, and special revelation is what we have today in our Bibles. So we can actually see what would be called progressive revelation, that we know more, we have more information than, let's say, Noah had. David had more information than Moses had. As we go down the timeline through the first century and into the New Testament writings through Revelation, more and more detail about prophecy and about biblical details were handed down to us, and it was elaborated more and more and became more and more detailed as we went down the timeline. So that is progressive revelation, and we can see that in special revelation. Here we got general revelation, that everybody should be able to see God in the design and in nature. So we're going to look at that, and we'll try and finish that tonight. We'll finish up the evidentiary method, which is showing some of this general revelation and teleological, which is the argument by design. We'll be able to see that as well. So I want to take a modern issue, a current issue that we have in our schools, just as a for instance of what we mean by general revelation, and people ought to be able to see God in nature. So in our schools, they are being taught, our students are being taught the theory of evolution as if it's the law of evolution. They teach the theory of evolution and do not give a counter argument like the theory of creation. And I want to demonstrate tonight that the theory of creation, what we believe is biblical creation, is actually more rational, more scientifically based than evolution. So first, I want to start by talking about what is evolution. When we think about evolution, what is it that we mean? And what we mean essentially is not a type of dog, for instance, became a different species of dog. What we're talking about is a creature of some kind evolved and became a creature of a totally different kind. For instance, the theory of evolution says that mankind probably evolved from a monkey. And so we had a species of monkey that transitioned into a species of Homo sapien, into a human being, which is preposterous in my opinion. There is nothing in the fossil record. We've been pretty good about digging up dinosaur bones. We have found woolly mammoth in the ice. We have found saber-toothed tigers. We have found trilobites in the mud. We have found a lot of different fossils. And there's lots of fossil layers that actually show that Noah's flood is possible. I would commend to you to look up Del Taggett. D-E-L is his first name. Del, I believe that's short for Delbert. And Taggett, I believe it's T-E-G-E-T-T. I think his website is Answers in Genesis. He has several videos on demonstrating that Noah's flood actually accounts for a lot of the geographic elements that we see out in nature, things like the Grand Canyon, mountain ranges, plateaus, and things like that, that coal, like used for fuel, can be made in a matter of weeks or months instead of thousands of years as the atheist or the non-believer might try to purport to us. So one species becoming a different species, there is nothing in the fossil record that has ever been found as a transition fossil from one species to another. And when I say from one species to another, let's go back to the Noah's Ark account and let's call them what Noah called them or what the Bible called them. They're different kinds. So there's never been an account where one kind transitioned to another, and there are no transition fossils anywhere in the fossil record that have ever been found. That's the first thing. It's a theory that one thing transitioned, but there is nothing in the fossil record. Now, I want to remind us what the Genesis account said in Noah's flood, that Noah put on the ark a pair, a male and female, a pair of every kind of creature on the earth. Now, let's take dogs, since I have that up on the screen. Let's take dogs as the example. You will notice, even in modern day, you could have a house with a dog in it and a cat in it, and you do not have to worry ever that you'll end up with a cross between a dog and a cat. You will never find a kitten puppy. Your horse and your cow are perfectly safe in the pasture together. You will never have a cross between a cow and a horse. the two are different kinds. They are genetically incompatible with each other. And yet I can take a polar bear from the Arctic and a black bear from the Appalachian Mountains, and we can have bear cubs with those because they are the same kind. They are both a type of a bear. Same thing with dogs. We can cross one dog species with another, and we can come up with what we typically would identify as a mutt. So think about how this speciation occurs, how the variety in the species actually occur. From an evolutionary standpoint, Charles Darwin and those that follow the evolutionary line of thinking would say that they were geographically separated and that they were evolving as a result of their environment. And so environmental conditions cause them to have birds to have a larger beak, or birds to have a smaller beak, birds to have different color feathers. The variety of animals would have been caused primarily as a result of environmental conditions. I would beg to differ. I can actually explain through biblical accounts exactly what happened to create the variety of animals that we see today. Let me bring up for a moment an example of what I mean. I'm going to blow this up fairly large. So if we had Adam and Eve originally, let's take one characteristic, say eye color, hair color, just a characteristic, a physical characteristic of Adam and of Eve. So when they pass on to their children, through genetics, we know through genetics that there is no condition where new genetic traits are added out of thin air. It doesn't happen. The way genetics operate is the mother and the father have genetics of their own, and they pass that off onto their offspring. So let's again take eye color as a for instance. If Adam had a dominant gene of, say, green eyes, and he had a recessive gene indicated by the lowercase a recessive gene of, let's say, brown eyes, and then Eve had a dominant gene of blue eyes and maybe a recessive gene of hazel eyes, what sort of options would that create? How many possibilities, how many possible combinations could there potentially be in their offspring? Well, there is one possibility where Adam and Eve don't pass any genes. In other words, when they had their offspring, though it's possible, not likely, but it's possible that they will not pass on any genes of these type. It's for whatever reason. More likely than not, well, let me see if I can't fix my. There we go. So it's possible here that Eve might pass on her recessive gene, the hazel eyes. It's possible that Eve might pass on her dominant gene, her blue eyes. It's possible that Eve might actually pass on through her genetics both of these traits. It's possible that Adam might pass on his recessive gene and Eve not pass on any of hers. It's possible that Eve might have her recessive gene. It's possible that we might get a recessive gene from Adam and a dominant gene from Eve. And on and on and on until finally it's possible. Well, let me back up. I wasn't planning for this, but it is possible finally that they pass on all of their genes. And when you count them up in the end, there are 16 different combinations just for this one trait for eye color in this instance. The point being, two people each having two genetic traits. Let's just go with a binary option of two traits each. It's possible that two people could have 16 combinations. In other words, they could have 16 children and each one of them have a different eye color just through genetic inheritance. That's simple genetics. So let's go back to the dog example. Let's think about what the American Kennel Club does as a for instance. What, in your opinion, is the definition of a purebred German Shepherd? I'll give you a moment to think about it. So a purebred German Shepherd has a purebred German Shepherd mother and a purebred German Shepherd father. And when the mother and father are both purebred German Shepherds, naturally the offspring will be a litter of German Shepherd puppies. You're not going to have Pekingese, you're not going to have Chihuahuas. Two German Shepherds will have a German Shepherd puppy, and that's through animal husbandry. The American Kennel Club, as one for instance, will breed only German Shepherds. Same thing with Rottweilers or Doberman Pinschers or other types of dog. If you wanted a purebred dog, you would have a purebred mother, a purebred father, and the two of them would have a litter of purebred offspring. Now, if you take a Rottweiler and a German Shepherd, the two, and cross the two, you will have something that we might consider a mutt. It will have the genetic traits of both. And it's possible it might look like a German Shepherd, or it's possible the offspring might look more like a Rottweiler, or it's possible that the offspring doesn't look like either parent because it has genetics from both. But the way we control having a purebred German Shepherd, a purebred Doberman Pinscher, or a purebred Rottweiler is by controlling the genetics and having access in terms of the mother and the father having access to each other and having offspring that will produce those purebred children. So think about the Noah's flood account. Noah and his wife descended from Adam and Eve. They both had their own genetics. The two of them, Noah and his wife, had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the 3 of those sons, each of those sons had a wife that also descended from Adam and Eve. And all 8 had their own genetics. And of course, the sons had the genetics of Noah and his wife. Those 16 sons are known, the 16 grandsons of Noah were known to be all over the world. You can go look at maps today, mountain ranges, cities, rivers, and other land marks throughout the globe bear the name of the 16 sons of Noah. So think about the Genesis account, Genesis 11, where the Tower of Babel was being built. And here in red, it says, behold, they are one people, and they all have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Let us, interesting that Elohim in Hebrew, the I am makes it plural. Here it is, come, let us. This is God talking to God. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them all over the face of the earth. So that was the crux of the Babel account. And so the 16 grandsons of Noah went all over the world. Now they are starting, potentially, we don't know this, but genetics tells us somewhere in the northern part of Africa is probably where a lot of this is genetics talking to us, not necessarily what we know, because Noah's Ark landed in the mountains of Ararat, which is in Turkey, but someplace here generally on the globe is probably where the genetic pool started with Noah and his wife. And it's known that Japheth was the father of the Caucasian races that went through Turkey and out into Europe. Ham and his sons went down through Palestine and into Africa. Shem and his sons went out through Asia and probably eventually became into North American Indians, South America, Central America, and that sort. Think about what that does, and think about it in terms of what the American Kennel Club does. When Japheth and his sons went toward Europe, and Ham went toward Africa, and Shem went toward Asia, we suddenly lost, and I'm talking about Japheth in particular, his sons and daughters suddenly lost access to 2/3 of the genetic pool. Now only the genetics of Japheth will go into Europe, and sons and daughters that live within a mile or two of each other. Remember, even as recently as 100 years ago, people in Appalachia, when they found a husband or a wife, they normally went on the other side of the mountain and found a wife in another village or a husband in another village, someplace in close proximity. People didn't travel the world the way they do here in 2021. And so the sons and daughters of Japheth were only marrying and having offspring with husbands and wives with spouses that looked like them. Same thing with Ham. When he went into Africa, the genetic traits of Japheth and Shem were lost. They have lost 2/3 of the genetic pool, and now only Ham exists with Ham's traits. And so if he had a dominant trait or darker skin that went down into the equatorial regions of Africa, it makes sense that over a period of time, sons and daughters that were marrying and having offspring with other sons and daughters of Ham, that dark skin, that dark pigment became a dominant gene, such that when a son of Ham and a daughter of Ham, and when I say a son, I'm talking about many, many generations away from Ham himself, those great grandchildren, descendants of Ham, were dark skinned, marrying another dark-skinned person, and they had dark-skinned children. Those are the dominant genes that we now find in Africa. Same thing with Europeans. They're all Caucasian. They're all what we would call white skin. They're not white. We're far from white color, but we call the race white. But they are white. They had red hair, blonde hair, maybe brown hair, but they had different traits than the sons of Ham would have had in Palestine and in Africa. And the same thing for Shem when they went up through Asia. They would have olive skin, almond-shaped eyes, or slanted eyes, as we call them for Asians. When we look at Asians, we can identify fairly rapidly at a glance that they're probably Korean, Chinese, Taiwan, Vietnam. Asians have a similar facial appearance, the same way that African descendants are easily identifiable, and Caucasian European descendants are easily recognizable. Those traits were passed through those generations after we lost 2/3 of the genetic pool. So those dominant genes being passed on from generation to generation is very, very similar to animal husbandry when you only have a German Shepherd being crossbred with another German Shepherd and having a German Shepherd puppy. When you have a black man and a black wife in Africa, they are going to have black children. And when you have Caucasians in Europe, they will have Caucasian children. And the Asian descendants of Shem are going to have Asian traits, just like we see today. It's the exact same thing that we see in the various species of dog. So when Charles Darwin got on a ship and went to the Galapagos Islands, of course, the birds and the animals that he saw did not look anything like what you would find in London. They spent generations geographically separated. They were on an island, Galapagos Island, and they adapted to not to their environment so much as they had dominant traits that were passed on a limited genetic pool, mothers and fathers through the generations, and that created the species, not the species, but the variety of species that we see today, the same way it does in dogs and the same way it did in human beings. So we can actually account for that, and the Bible actually tells us how the varieties became the varieties. We had the Tower of Babel event. We went out and populated the earth as God had commanded. And we have the variety of human beings and the variety of animals that we see today. It had absolutely nothing to do with evolution and everything to do with genetic inheritance. When we teach our kids that the theory of evolution is more likely than not to be the truth, and they flip the page in their science book from evolution to genetic biology, the two are contradicting each other, because genetics is all about inheritance and evolution is about creating a trait out of thin air. Again, we don't have anything in the fossil record. It has never been observed one species turning to another. There is no scientific basis for the evolutionary theory, but there is a lot of scientific that we can reproduce genetics that I've just explained. We can reproduce it in the lab. And in fact, I would argue we've been doing it for thousands of years through animal husbandry. It's nothing new to the human species to do animal husbandry and create the varieties, or even create the types of animals, German Shepherds, Doberman Pinschers, Chihuahuas, or whatever kind of offspring that we want. We even do it in plants. We have hybrid plants. Now, we are getting into GMO products, which are very, very different than hybrid. Hybrid means we take the traits of one plant and the traits of another plant, and we cross-pollinate the two in order to bring the best of both into a child, let's call it a child plant. They do this for tomatoes, they do this for corn, they do this for all types of hybrid plants. And they do it for taste, they do it for marketability, that they stay fresher longer. We have thornless blackberries, which are easier to pick, they're larger, they taste better. We can cross-pollinate between plants and produce the types of end products that we want through hybridization, and we don't have to do it through genetic manipulation. All right, so that is the argument I wanted to make for evidence against evolution, and a demonstration, at least, or at least a rational explanation for why the Bible is true, and how it holds a more of a scientific basis than the theory of evolution. All right, so that is a segue that takes us right into the teleological argument. Now, the teleological argument is simply evidence of design. Remember what Paul said that in general revelation, men are without excuse. They ought to be able to see design in nature. And that is true. We should be able to walk into nature and see things. But I wanted to take a current event, something that's happening in the news today, and actually show an idea of design that we can see in our world. Here's a couple of centuries old apologists. Everybody has heard of Thomas Aquinas. William Paley actually has an argument, and he said basically, and you can read it for yourself down here, but basically if he's walking in the woods down a path and he kicked a stone, he might think nothing about it. But if he came across a watch, like a pocket watch, that pocket watch has gears, it has a face, it has hands, it has a chassis, and it does one thing and does one thing well. It keeps time, and it keeps time accurately. And if you came across that watch in the woods, you couldn't help but notice that it was designed. And if it was designed, the design implies that there was a designer. In other words, what he says here, if there is a watch, there must be a watchmaker. And we can see the same thing in nature. I want to argue for, let's take the human body. We have a lot of different systems that make up the human body. We got skeletal system, muscular system, the lymphatic system, respiratory system, digestive system, your nervous system, cardiovascular system, the urinary system, the reproductive system. Now look at each of those. That is a system of system. What exactly is a system? A system is designed to do one thing and one thing well. The cardiovascular system oxygenates blood and pumps it around your body through veins and capillaries and arteries and things like that. The nervous system transports electronic signals from your brain to the various muscles in your body, and those muscles are there to receive those signals and tug on the skeletal system to make your hands and fingers and legs and arms move. Your respiratory system takes oxygen out of the air and puts carbon dioxide into the air. Your digestive system keeps you alive by absorbing nutrients from other things around the environment. But you take any one, just pick one at random and remove it from that list, and the human ceases to exist. Just pick one. If you don't eat, you don't have a digestive system, you die. You don't have a cardiovascular system, you die. Don't have a nervous system, you die. Don't have a reproductive system, the human race ceases to exist. This is a system of systems. Each of those systems does one thing and does one thing well. They are specifically designed with a particular purpose to do one thing and to do one thing well. And they coexist in the human body and are interdependent upon each other. That is much like a car. You have an exhaust system, you have a fuel system, you have a power system, an electronic system. And all of those things function together in order to make the car, a machine, operate. The human body is designed in exactly the same way, or any other body for that matter. A dog, a cat, a horse, a cow, all of them have these traits that we see in nature. They are a system of systems, each of which have been designed to do one thing and to do one thing well. So this is a chromosome and a cell, and down here we're looking at the helix, I believe they call it, for DNA. And as we all know, DNA are kind of the genetics of the human body. That's where we get the traits for hair color and eye color and skin pigment and things like that. All of these maybe thousands, perhaps millions of different genetic traits that each one of us have in our bodies are encoded in the DNA. So I want to relate this to something very current, recent in the news. Let me bring up again. Well, let's take for a moment something that we see from COVID-19 vaccines. So we got currently the FDA has approved Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson for public use under an emergency order. And of course, Pfizer has received not just the emergency use authorization, but they also have been approved for public use from the FDA. What I want to look at is what exactly do we mean by mRNA? mRNA is the messenger RNA. And what we have discovered, this is the Moderna. I will leave this link in the description. So if you want to look at it and read it for yourself, you'll have access to this link and you can kind of read it yourself. But this is the Science and Fundamentals of mRNA Technology page. You can see that here in the title. And it talks quite a bit about genetics, about DNA, and what messenger RNA is all about. And what I want to focus on is here toward the bottom. Now I have copied this over into a PDF format. And what I want to show is exactly what they are doing with the mRNA technology. And let me demonstrate as a programmer first. My undergraduate degree was in computer programming. So I want to give you a demonstration here. If I were to begin a computer program, I would start with a begin. And my college professor told me if you play with your toys, you have to pick them up when you're done. So you have a begin and you have an end. And if I wanted to write a program that would print the date, there I have a computer program. And so every time this program runs, it would begin, it would print the date, and it would end the program, and I would be done. Very, very simple program. Now, what if I wanted to only print the date during the PM hours? So if time is greater than, let's say 11:59 a.m., then I want you to print the date. And again, if you're going to play with your toys, you have to pick them up when you're done. So now we have designed a program that is slightly more complex. If I'm going to print the date, but I only want to print the date during the PM hours, in other words, if the time is greater than 11:59 a.m., I'm going to print the date then. If it's during the morning and AM hours, it's going to leave the screen blank and not print the date. Point is, as a designer, I have been able to code this program to do very specific things under certain conditions and do the things that I want it to do. And so I want to draw your attention to what mRNA is doing, what Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J have been able to do. So there's a 4-step process, and I want you to kind of pick up on keywords that I've highlighted here. They are taking, this is a process known as transcription, and they are taking RNA, a copy out of the DNA sequence, and they are developing the vaccine. So this copy of the mRNA is going to go into the cell, into the nucleus of the cell, where you have ribosomes, and ribosomes are responsible for creating various proteins. And so the mRNA that they are designing goes into the ribosomes. These are complex machinery in the cells that are responsible for making the proteins, okay? Then through another process known as translation, the ribosomes read the mRNA that Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson have developed, and the cell follows the instructions, creating the protein step by step. So basically, the COVID-19 protein looks like a ball with a bunch of spikes on it, and it's the spikes that hang on to your cells and make the virus very, what do I want to call it? It passes along from person to person very easily because of spike proteins, similar to a sand spur or a piece of Velcro. Those spikes hang on to your cells and become sticky that way, and then are able to reproduce, spread throughout your body, and cause you to become sick. So what Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson have done is they're using this mRNA technology to make a false, let's call it a false virus. By taking mRNA technology, they're genetically reprogramming the virus so that when it enters your cell, the cell will read the data, literally read the data the same way that the computer program that we just looked at is done. It will read it, and it will produce the proteins in order to create antibodies and defend against that spike protein that we find on the COVID-19 cell. Down here below, they are giving you a high-level overview of what they do. We start with our desired sequence. In other words, they have programmed this routine, this program, genetic program. They start with a desired sequence for a protein. We design and synthesize the corresponding mRNA sequence, the code. There's the word right there, the code that will create that protein. Before synthesis, we will engineer the mRNA sequence to optimize the mRNA physical properties, as well as those that are encoded for the protein. We deliver the mRNA sequence to the cells responsible for making that protein via one of the several modalities. And what they're talking about is they can use mRNA technology for COVID-19 vaccines. They can make vaccines for cancers. They can make vaccines for or medicines or pharmaceuticals for a variety of reasons. So the mRNA technology is multi-use. That's what they mean by the modality. They can use that as a baseline delivery platform and use it for viruses, for cancers, and for other human illnesses. And then finally, the last bullet, and once the mRNA, the instructions are in the cell, human biology takes over, the ribosomes read the code and build the protein, and the cells express the protein in the body. That is what they're doing. The human body has these has this DNA chain, and that DNA is known. This is how GMO foods are developed. They have figured out genetic portions of the genetics where they can extract and remove and re-engineer. They can reprogram the DNA in order to produce the characteristics and the traits that they want in tomatoes, in fruits and vegetables and things like that, and then they can make it available in the public market. For me, I don't eat genetically modified foods because I don't necessarily trust what men are doing with genetics. When we think about prior to the 1990s, we did not even have the ability to do paternity tests. We've only had genetics as a science really in the last few decades. And so we're still in learning mode. I don't think we've completely mastered that. And so it's kind of frightening when you think about maybe if we've got something wrong and and we don't know it yet, that could turn out to be catastrophic, particularly if that gets passed on from one generation to the next, and that genetic is in you. For me, I don't want to be anything a part of that. So the point of this is not to scare anybody from taking the vaccine. The point of this is to show that if you have a watch, it implies that you have a watchmaker. If you have been programmed, and we can now see that programming in your genetics, and we can reprogram the genetics to cause you to do something that you ordinarily wouldn't do. We're able to reprogram the DNA. The design that we see in the human body implies that there is a designer. And we have become, at this point in the 2021, we at least have the ability to manipulate the genetics and produce vaccines and other pharmaceuticals by taking advantage of those. Now, whether that is ethical or moral or whatever, that's a different argument altogether. But a design that we can see and manipulate implies that there was a designer that programmed our DNA to do the things that it does in the first place. That is one of many, many arguments for the teleological argument. So I think next week we will get into the last of these. We'll probably talk about the ontological argument. This is the argument that there is nothing greater than God. It's a pretty interesting argument. It's not one of my favorites. Again, I'm not a philosopher, but it is an argument that takes a minute to get your mind wrapped around before you completely understand it. So I'll go into some detail about that. And we'll talk about the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument is akin to the non-believers' what they call the Big Bang Theory. So we will talk about that next Sunday, both the ontological and the cosmological argument. I will probably bypass the presuppositional and the moral arguments, but I'll hit them at a high level right now. The presuppositional argument is something that you presuppose. Your mind is staked on a particular mindset, and you're arguing from that mindset. So the reason I think this is not the strongest argument is if my presupposition is that God exists, and I am going to argue that God exists from my presupposition, and I am arguing that case to an atheist who does not believe, their presupposition is God does not exist, you're never going to make any progress on demonstrating to that person that God exists. That's the reason I don't like the presuppositional argument. Basically, what you're doing is trying to show the absurdity of their argument and the rationality and the plausibility of your own. That's essentially what you're doing. It can be insulting sometimes, and I think these other arguments you can do essentially the same thing and do it in a more constructive way. The moral argument is the argument of morals. So we believe in a Judeo-Christian ethic. We believe it's wrong to lie, steal, cheat, kill, things like that. When an atheist also believes that it is wrong to lie, steal, cheat, and kill, we have to ask, on what basis do they make that argument? For the Christian, we can look in the Bible and we can say, well, we've got the 10 Commandments, and we have values that we can derive out of Scripture that serve as the basis for our moral foundation. The atheist, if they believe that people came to exist and creation came to exist out of pure chance, and that people are little more than blobs of protoplasm that just happen to fall in the right place and have a consciousness and have the ability to argue, on what basis If that's what they believe, on what basis do they believe that it's wrong to lie, steal, cheat, and to kill? And I would argue, in the case of the moral argument, that they have learned that from us. Again, throughout world history, there has never been a civilization that did not believe in a God. You had the Greeks had gods, the Romans had gods, the Egyptians had gods, the Incas and the Aztecs had gods. You had gods in Asia. You've had gods in just about every civilization throughout world history. There is something hard-coded in our DNA. There is something hard-coded in the psyche of human beings that we look outside of ourselves and we look to the eternal. We are looking for a God. Now, many times I would argue they got it wrong. You had polytheism, and you had different corruptions of gods. You would have human sacrifices. You would have all sorts of things like that. But they were looking to the eternal and trying to appease a God that was greater than they were. I would make the same argument for the atheist with lie, steal, cheat, and kill, that there is something ingrained in the human psyche that we not only look to the eternal, but we also have a various baseline of morals that we all operate from. So that is the gist of the presuppositional and the moral arguments. And next week we will get together and talk about the cosmological and the ontological arguments. The ontological argument is going to take a little bit of time to get through it and explain, but I think it's a little bit like riding a bike. Once you get your mind wrapped around it, everybody can do just fine. So I will see everybody next Sunday. God bless.